We originally recorded this podcast a couple of weeks ago on May 17th, before the senseless murder of George Floyd.
The original motivation to create this podcast was to have open dialogue about oppression and the lack of diversity existing in not only pop culture, but the places we love in general. We want to make it clear that we are grateful to everyone who is protesting and all the change they've brought along the way.
A Black man dying at the hands of the police is not a new story. Despite Quinn and I having been involved in activism and direct action for several years, it does not matter whether or not we have the term anti-oppression in our bios or whether we change our profile pictures to black squares and use the hashtag Black Lives Matter. The work does not end when we declare ourselves anti-racist. Racism is threaded into the blanket of our society, our history, and every system in place today. It is our responsibility as two white content creators to be constantly educating ourselves on the ongoing struggle and stories of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and to use our platform to address and take action against this racism.
Moving forward, both on our podcast and our social media platforms, we'll be suggesting other related media that can either help diversify what we consume or educate us on racism in our society and what we can do about it. This week, we want to highlight the podcast Code Switch by NPR, hosted by various journalists of color. Each episode of Code Switch ranges between 15 to 40 minutes long and is filled with insightful conversations about how race and racism impacts every part of society. I particularly appreciated a more recent episode entitled A Decade of Watching Black People Die, a chilling look at how familiar the stories of police brutalities are, as they were exactly the same 10 years ago. The link to this episode and a couple of other resources will be in our show notes. Hello, and welcome to What the Phalange, the podcast where we watch every episode of Friends, discuss it, deconstruct it, and fan over it, one episode at a time. This is Quinn.
And this is Emily. And today we're going to be talking about Season 1, Episode 1, the one where Monica gets a roommate. Or, also known as the one where it all began, the first one, and the pilot. This episode aired for the first time on September 22nd, 1994. It was written and created by Marta Kaufman and David Crane, and it was directed by James Burrows. It's also known as the episode that we like to call the one where Rachel moves in, Ross grabs a spoon, and Monica dates Paul the wine guy.
Before we get into it, we want to preemptively say that this is our first time hosting a podcast, and you'll probably notice that we appropriately had some technical difficulties, mostly with some sound quality. We hope that you'll stick with us through navigating all the foreseeable and unforeseeable issues that are to come through this humbling process of launching our own podcast. Apparently, it's a little bit harder than we thought it would be. We also want to thank everyone who helped us choose a name for this podcast. The process was so much fun, and we're so grateful for everyone who voted and who gave suggestions, and we really got some creative ideas going, and I'm really looking forward to that energy continuing on moving forward as we continue to create and build this podcast from scratch together as a community. Okay, are you excited?
I'm excited. Okay, we're doing this. All right. First time ever making a podcast. This is wild.
I know who you are, but why don't you tell the world who you are?
All right. Hi, guys. My name is Emily. I'm a good old-fashioned millennial living in Montreal, born and raised, actually. I am a cis woman. My pronouns are she and her. I am openly queer, and I am married to a very, very lovely human who might one day be a guest on this show because he has a whole lot of knowledge of Friends as well.
Oh my God, understatement.
Yeah, understatement of the year. I am an avid feminist. I am an anti-diet, body positive yoga teacher and personal trainer. And yeah, I've spent kind of a lot of my life working to apply my leftist anti-oppression politics to my work. So trying to make yoga and fitness as accessible as possible. Yeah. Who are you?
Hi, I'm the other talking head. My name is Quinn. My pronouns are zir or they, them. And I am also a body positive human in the fitness industry. I'm specifically a yoga instructor and massage therapist. Right now, I'm located out of the Greater Toronto area. However, that might change. We don't know what's happening in the world right now.
We never know.
And I am also a very new content creator, which is an exciting new world for me. Very awkward. And just so everyone has some context, Emilie and I are siblings. So I also grew up in Montreal, born and raised as well.
Yeah, and for context, also Quinn is my older sibling. So Quinn is 30. You turned 30 this year, I think?
Yeah, I turned 30.
Yeah, true. Crazy. And I am, like I already said, I'm 26.
No one ever really knows that I'm actually older. So I feel good that now people will know. Everyone always thinks I'm younger than you.
But that's because they'll look at our faces and they'll think I'm older. And now they can't look at our faces, so they'll just see our voices. I mean, hear our voices.
I just always assume that people think I'm more immature than you. And therefore...
Agreed. No, I'm kidding. It is, May 17th, 2020. And like many, many citizens of the world, we are dealing with social distancing and quarantine and the unknownness of the future of the world.
So we decided that we'd watch Friends, but this time we'd talk about it.
Because we already watch a lot of Friends. But then we thought maybe people would want to listen to us talk about Friends.
So since COVID started, the pandemic lockdown in Ontario started, I actually was probably in about the 9th season when that happened. And I finished the end of the 10th season. And I just immediately started from the first season, first episode, right off the bat.
It's the endless loop going.
Exactly. Especially right now. It's so needed. They're my friends.
They are. Yeah.
Get me.
So Quinn and I have been watching Friends, not actually since it came out in 1994.
No, we were like later to the game.
Yeah, I was only 1 in 1994. When the first episode came out, in fact. And you were, I guess, 4.
4. Yeah.
4. And so our watching of Friends was much later, but I guess we started watching Friends maybe a couple years after it ended.
Yeah, probably, because it went until 2004.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so it was probably a couple years after it completely ended that do you remember how it happened? Because our whole family got into it. Was it like one of us got like a DVD box set for?
So I remember what happened is that I started watching it on TV when they were really like airing reruns of it.
Right. It makes sense that you let our family into this.
Yeah, because I always let everyone into TV. I didn't do sports, but I sure as hell watch TV. I remember because Mom thought that it was really inappropriate.
Yeah, well, it was very racy when it first came out, right? Like, yeah, as we'll get into later on, right?
And it was, I think, so I must have been watching it, I think, in my, second to last couple years of high school. So, 2007, 2008. maybe 2009 sort of thing. So then, and then so it was a couple years after it came out. And then I remember watching several episodes and then asking for the first season on DVD. Remember DVDs? For Christmas, and then getting it, and then having us all sit down during the Christmas holidays and watch it, and then mom being like, oh my god, why am I letting my like teenager watch a show that's so racy? Because classic, you know.
I know, right?
But I must have been about 16, 17. So.
I think it was earlier than what you're saying, because I remember Mark, our older brother, he was still living at home, because even he got pulled into it.
Yeah.
It was like all of us.
So I would have been, I guess more like, I guess I would have been younger, like 13, 14. So I guess that's understandable that my parents thought it was a little inappropriate. Because I definitely remember watching it and being like, I don't understand some of the sex jokes.
Yeah, that's
definitely an underlying theme for sure. But yeah, so we've been watching it for a while after it aired. And then since that happened, then I think like everyone in our family, including our extended family, started watching it too. And then eventually we just, over time, owned all 10 seasons of Friends on DVD.
Yeah, we started getting gifted them back and forth, and then would argue about who owns what season.
Yeah. Like we binge watched Friends before people binge watched shows. Like we would binge watch Friends like before Netflix even existed, because we had the DVDs. So we would put DVD in, and usually it's 6 episodes per DVD, and you could just press play and they play back to back, no break, and you just watch 6 episodes of Friends in a row, and then the only time you have to get up is for snacks and to change the DVD. But like mostly you would just binge watch the episodes. And we did that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then Mark met Allie, his now wife, and she just fit perfectly, because she would binge watch them with us.
Yeah, yeah. Which actually, it's so funny that you're saying Allie, because that kind of is what happened. Like, Allie got us into Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is also another 1990s show, which is an epic, unreal show.
Oh, good.
Which I started listening to Buffering the Vampire Slayer, which is an epic podcast where they go through each episode of Buffy and kind of analyze it. And it's a podcast created by 2 queer women, and as queer people ourselves, we wanted to do pretty much kind of the same thing with Friends.
Yeah. And I mean, like, looping all the way back to Allie as well, I feel like Allie was also a huge catalyst between us and within our family to sort of get us having much more open conversations about kind of like watching media and sort of like deconstructing it in a way that is like very constructive.
Yeah.
And sort of like not necessarily having to just sort of like take what you're seeing at face value, but actually sort of like analyzing it a little bit, especially when we're talking about things released in 1994. You know, we love all of it, but there's certain things that have stood the test of time, and there are other things that just maybe were progressive at the time, or maybe actually even just weren't progressive at the time, and definitely have not stood the test of time. But
like consistent transphobic jokes.
Yeah, and there's just like so many little pieces like that. But there's something about Friends that it's just consistently, though, we love. Like, it's just,
and we come back to all the time. When you and I originally started watching Friends together, our first exposure of Friends was mostly through the DVDs, which, if you are familiar with the Friends DVDs, you know that it's way better than the Netflix version. Not to shit on the Netflix versions, but the Friends DVDs, the episodes are ranging from, rather than the like original 22 minutes that you see on Netflix, it goes anywhere from 26 to 30 minutes. So you get like almost 8 extra minutes of scenes. And so, which is
8 extra minutes.
It's No, it's pivotal. No, it's pivotal. Like, if you are a Friends fan, you gotta one day get your hands on the DVDs, get your hands on the full length episodes, because they will be game changers. We aren't the first ones doing a podcast like this. There's plenty of podcasts that exist out there where people are talking about going through, watching every episode one by one and talking about each episode. But I think that what we wanted to do specifically is watch these episodes and be able to give a little bit more of a constructive criticism on the episodes. Because there's just things that you could say in 1994 that you straight up just can't say today, 25 years later, which, like, is a good thing. Like, the fact that, like, television has moved very progressively in the past 25 years. Like, even if you just look at the show, and we've talked about this before, but, like, the fact that, like, the 6 main characters of the show are all very thin, very beautiful, white, straight. That's, like, a huge thing that, you know, nowadays, if you turn on TV, yes, that happens. Don't get me wrong, we're not super progressive yet, but, like, it is more common to see a more diverse group of characters on a television show. And so, yeah, I think that we just wanted to talk about that. We wanted to get to the roots of that, but also appreciate how incredible the show is at the same time, you know?
Yeah, I think that we are well equipped to both gush and deconstruct all in one beautiful little package. So I just want to give a little bit of a shout out to Rachel, who was actually the one that that suggested to me that we take this on and do this. And I feel like she'll probably be featured later on as a kind of like a guest host to kind of talk about a future episode, because she is also up there in the people that I know who fanboy hard about, you know, on the Friends show. So
without further ado,
it's 1994. If you listen to the radio that week, the song "I'll Make Love to You" by Boys to Men is on the charts. Okay, like top up there. Like, do you remember how that goes?
Oh, I do.
Also, Bill Clinton is president. We have O.J. Simpson being recently arrested. Okay. And then also Nelson Mandela was elected president just a couple months before, in the first multiracial election in South Africa. And we've turned on the TV. We're on NBC. I don't necessarily know what time, but it's Thursday, September 22nd.
I think it's 7:30 p.m. it airs.
Okay, 7:30 p.m. And we are entering first episode ever, the pilot episode of Friends.
Great. So this is the pilot, also known, it's been renamed multiple times in many different ways. The pilot, the first one, the one where it all began, the one where Monica gets a roommate. So this episode was written by Marta Kaufman and David Crane. They are the writers throughout the whole 10 seasons.
Or more specifically, they're the creators.
They're also the creators, yeah. And it was directed by James Burrows, excuse me. And so this episode, we pretty much get an introduction to the whole gang. So it's, you know, it starts off, we get 4 of the main characters, and then eventually Ross shows up, and then eventually Rachel shows up, and we kind of get a snippet into the whole gang. And it sets the stage for pretty much the 10 seasons. You get to know on a pretty deep level right away about all the different characters. Right away, you feel the chemistry between the 6 characters. You know, you learn Phoebe is like super aloof.
Yeah, they set up the characters super well.
Yeah, they set up all the characters really, really well. And yeah, so we can just start going through it.
Yeah, I mean, what I find particularly interesting about this episode is that, or this pilot per se, is that the concept of the show is not a storyline, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's not like this big event that's happening. The actual concept of the show is really just these 6 characters.
Yeah.
And you really get that sense from the first episode where it's like right off the bat, they're sitting in the coffee shop, which is like where you're just going to see them. It's going to be like a place that they pivot off of for the rest of the 10 seasons.
Yeah, I don't think there's a single episode in which the coffee shop does not appear.
Except for like those episodes where they're like traveling and not in New York.
That's true. Yeah.
Which is rare and interesting. But yeah, no, you're right. Exactly. It's just like there isn't an episode where you're not at some point a scene in there.
And I feel like the same could be also said for Monica's apartment, which we eventually kind of move into Monica's apartment that everyone eventually lives in. So just for context, we want to be talking about this show with the idea that you don't know necessarily all the big spoilers of the show, but you also have an understanding of the show in general. So as we talk about the show, we might bring up, past things in maybe Chandler's existence or Phoebe's history or some things that kind of show up as themes throughout the whole 10 seasons, but we will try to not reveal any huge, big spoiler alerts. So if you are watching the show for the first time, don't worry, no spoilies. So don't worry about that. But
I think we really want people, like, if you haven't already seen it, oh my God, watch it along with us. Like,
that would be unreal.
Oh my God. And also, like, I'm so excited for your journey. I'm freaking out over here.
So excited for your journry. But also, like,
watch it along with us.
Also concerned about your journey too, because like some people have, like, I've read articles about like Gen Zs watching Friends for the first time and being like, how the fuck is this show okay? Like, this is not okay. Like, there's a lot of things that are not okay. So take every episode with a grain of salt, walk through it as if you are walking through the 90s, and, be critical, but also enjoy the humor for what it is,
Yeah, and I think that kind of in the same way when you watch the first season of Buffy, we're going to refer to Buffy so much here, but just kind of
give it a chance.
It's not... See, the love and the following of Friends cannot be held within one episode.
Yeah.
It really is, it is especially not the first episode. Like, the first episode is like, it's the spark. It's like
it sets the stage.
It sets the stage. But what I find, going back to this episode, is that what I find so interesting is that it is just a lot of potential, It's like it's still kind of raw. There's magic happening there between all of the different characters. Like, there's pretty good chemistry considering this is like a pilot, which means that, like, the amount of time that the actors really have known each other is not very long. They haven't really been in different scenarios together. Like, usually pilots are considered like not very good. Like, it takes a lot for them to be good, but you can really see that there's potential there between the characters and between the actors. And then what you get to do is go on this ride and kind of really see as things like flesh out. And it's almost like kind of representative of kind of where they are in their lives, right? Like, the show was about a bunch of people in their early 20s that just, or like early mid 20s that kind of very relatable to every millennial, but like don't really know what they're doing with their life, and but trying to like figure it out. And you kind of, it kind of really works with the way that the show actually kind of develops, because you have this idea that has so much potential, and then it just sort of fleshes itself out, even though there's a bit of direction, a bit of where, like the creators kind of wanted it to go, but you can also sort of tell that it sort of develops itself, and it's very representative of our lives, really. Although mine is really just still trying to flesh out itself anyway. So it's relatable, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally. So right away the show starts and we enter the scene and we're in Central Park. So Central Perk, like we already mentioned, is like integral to the entire show. Just like how some people will joke about how New York City is the 5th character in Sex and the City, I would argue that Central Perk is the 7th character of Friends. So the way we're doing this is that we're watching this episode a couple of times, and then we're writing notes, and then we're talking about it. But right away in my note, I wrote, do you remember dating? Because like it was such a different thing. Like, obviously, I was 1 year old in 1994, so I was not dating in 1994. But the way that we date now is so different, you know? Like, just the idea of, like, meeting someone, going out to a fancy dinner, sitting down, and there being this kind of, like, eventually in the episode, they talk about, like, will there be a 5th date, you know? And, like, actually counting out dates. It's just such a different flow to how dating works now. So often the way dating works now is like, you know,
you swiped right.
Swiping in a direction, you know, like, or meeting someone through friends is definitely a thing. And like being friends first and then like having blurred lines between friendship and dating. That's a super common thing with people our age, myself included, aka how I met my husband. And like just kind of that flow of relationships is, I think, very different now than it was in the early 90s. I first want to talk about Ross's first line in the entire show. Hi. Which, if you've watched Friends before, spoiler alert, it's not the last time he's going to say this. It's such a classic line that defines Ross as this, like, kind of dumpy, pathetic, like, heartbroken loser, which, like...
Whoa, harsh. He's going through a divorce, Emily.
Okay, you're right. Well, we'll get into our criticisms of Ross later on. But yeah, no, Ross in this episode is not bad. In fact, right away, Ross is actually a pretty decent guy. And again, if you've watched Friends, usually if you have any form of feminist analysis in your brain, Ross is a tricky character.
There's some really tangible things to unpack in Ross's character. And I think that he's such a good character to use for that because he's on one hand someone who's just really tries to do the right thing and really loves and just wants to be in a committed relationship. Like you can tell that even in the first episode, right? Like he's devastated he's getting a divorce. He just wants to be married. Cue Rachel walking in a wedding dress.
Yeah.
But at the same time, his desire for these secure things are also like a point of like selfishness. And we get to see that later on. And it's sort of like this duality of him, you know, being the nice guy, but also, you know, when that nice guyness kind of leaks into less healthy aspects of a character. And so he's a very multi-dimensional character.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny because, you know, we joke about naming this podcast The Friend Zone, but I feel like that's so integral to Ross's character is like in the whole first season, we kind of experience Ross in the quote unquote friend zone, and his like frustration with that and how it makes him both a really good friend, but also, you know, makes him questionable.
Yeah, questionable motives at least.
Okay, so right away again, this is like still in the first 5-6 minutes of the episode. Right away, you know, we find out, okay, Ross is getting divorced because Carol, his now soon-to-be ex-wife, is a lesbian, which again, right away, thrown into a queer character into the show. We don't meet her in this episode. But I really like the line, and I think that like there are a lot of criticisms for the way Carol, I don't know if they mentioned that Ross's ex-wife's name is Carol in this episode. I'm not sure. But anyways, her name is Carol. And I like the way that, you know, right away Joey says, and you didn't know she was a lesbian. And then Ross replies, she didn't know, how should I know? Which I think is like a really good view of a queer character, because so often queer characters are shown on television and it's like, oh my God, they're obviously gay, you know, and like they do like super stereotypical queer things. And like it, like the whole audience knows that they're gay, and then there's this big reveal that the character is gay, and people are like, I already knew that, like I knew since the day you were born, you know, like, and I really hate that trope, you know, like I'm not saying that, like a lot of queer people identify with that, like not, you know, shitting on that, but I think that the idea of like being able to be like, I had no idea this person was gay is really defining for Carol as a character. I don't know. That's just my opinion.
No, I totally agree. And I think that, again, this first episode, you kind of get a bit of a glimpse into the future of what this is going to look like, because, like you said, there's sort of, that's a really great line. Like there's a lot of awareness in that line of kind of like, you, what it inherently implies is stereotypes are not necessarily right, you know? Yeah. But then later on in the episode,
yeah,
when they're putting together furniture, when Joey and Chandler and Ross are putting together furniture at Ross's new place because of the divorce, he's moving into a new place. You know, there's a line where he's like, he pulls out a beer and he gets all mopey like Ross does, and is like, this was Carol's favorite beer. She always drank it out of the can. And then Joey's like, sure you didn't know she was gay? And
no. He goes, I should have known. Ross says I should have known.
Oh, Ross
delivers that line. Yeah.
Right. So there you go. And there's sort of like, but also, you know, as a queer person, or us both being queer, there's sort of like an aspect of enjoying that line, even though again it's like a stereotype. There can be also an aspect of really kind of enjoying certain stereotypes, despite the fact that both of us are now sober. But
yeah,
but it's sort of like this back and forth of, there are aspects of the show that are very progressive and forward. You're introduced to the fact that there is a lesbian couple in the show.
Yeah.
And so these things are like really forward for 1994.
Yeah.
But
and especially in the 90s, when the main introduction of gay characters was like when, especially, like there were some occasional, but like usually queer people are the butt of a joke, which in this case it is a little bit, but it's more at the expense of Ross than it is at the expense of the queer character herself. And also a big theme in the 90s was like a straight female character kissing another woman, and then that being really sexualized, but then that never going anywhere. So like a straight woman exploring her sexuality, this gay character is on for one episode, sometimes even just one scene, and then it's no longer a plot point and no one ever follows it ever again. It's never brought up again. It's never integral to a character's development, you know, anything like that. So I think that the fact that this character is being introduced, and over the course of the seasons, you know, you get a little bit more of an understanding of her. You learn more about her, and her character gets a bit rounded off, you know?
Yeah. And so that's something to look forward to as episodes move on.
Now let's dive into Chandler. Let's do that.
Chandler. So, I mean, like right off the bat, he's telling a story about his dreams that are ridiculous. Phones are his penis. He's talking to his mom on them. And
well, when you put it that way.
I mean, he's just a little bit of like just the funny guy, really.
Mm-hmm.
What are your first impressions of him in this episode?
Like, I find that I'm quite a sarcastic person. I don't know if you've noticed, but
What?
So I really identify with a lot of Chandler's humor. And I think that when I was first watching the show, I really, really, really loved Chandler's sarcasm. And I think that, like, it was just so great to have him come in with these super sarcastic jokes. But he's also an ass. Like, he's also, he's super sarcastic, but he's also, like, sometimes pushes it a little bit too far. Sometimes I think that his jokes verge on just being mean. And that's definitely a thing that we'll critique throughout the show, I'm sure. But I my first impressions of Chandler is that, like, he's the funny guy, and he's here to make us laugh.
He's the one that makes everyone's eyes roll, but also have a little tilt of a smile, like, at the same time, like, that annoyed, funny person, like, you're just annoying, but really funny. And I find that as time goes on through the seasons, that there are definitely moments where it's like Chandler is not in the room and someone says something and you're definitely like, that was a Chandler joke.
Yeah.
And you could say that it's representative of the fact that, people hang out with each other all the time, rub off on each other. But sometimes it's just that, like, Chandler's humor is just so good. You can't waste it. You just have to have another character say it sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because his sarcasm is so, he just adds a whole other level to it. And I think he really sort of pushes forward this sort of kind of like teasy nature between all of them. But in a lot of ways, there's a lot of love behind all of it for everyone too. So I think that it's sort of like this thing that there are issues behind it, and we'll see it more as time goes on, the way that it plays into ideas of masculinity and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, it is also kind of like a little bit of a glue that holds them together, in a sense of, like, they're able to tease each other. They're in that circle of, like, they've all given each other the right to be those people to each other. And that's like a really close, intimate thing, And
I also find it interesting because I remember, so, like, when I first watched the show, I remember really being like, oh man, I wish I had a group of friends like Friends. Like, I was like, they're so funny, they're so, like, supportive of each other. They have funny humor. Obviously it's not real, but it's all scripted. But, like, it was like, I was like, oh, I wish I had this kind of friends. And then when I started getting into, like, more of a feminist analysis of it, or, like, even just, like, a bit more of a like leftist analysis of it, you kind of start to, like, at least for me, I felt like I started breaking down the relationships a little bit more, and I was like, actually, it would kind of suck to be in a group of friends like this sometimes. Like, there are some parts that, like, that come up often, in which one of them is going through a problem, and the other, for the comedy of the show, the other people just kind of poke fun at them, make fun at them, push them. And I remember thinking, like, oh man, that would really suck to be on the tail end of that. But then I feel like my analysis of things kind of waved back and forth, because then I was like, it takes a very specific kind of group of friends, and even family, right? Because if you think of, like, they're kind of just like each other's chosen family, right? In which you can find sarcasm and humor and comfort with people regardless of what they're going through. Like, there is a certain amount of, like if I think of our family, sometimes we can be really sarcastic and bitter with each other. There are times where we've overstepped and it's like, hey man, you're being mean. But, like, there's also times where it's like, once you recognize that you feel really safe and comfortable with someone, and you feel like, these people are going to love me no matter what, there is a certain amount of sarcasm and like kind of bite or bitterness that you can put into a relationship and just expect it to withstand anyways. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, I agree. And I think that that's yeah, that kind of moves me into like another thought I have on, or just like moves into like us starting to look at things like Phoebe and Joey as well, and then looking at all the characters all together and sort of seeing them that they're all so very different, you know, like they're, and especially when you look at the one end of the spectrum of Phoebe and the other end of the spectrum, which was probably Ross, you know, like, and then all the nuanced characters in between, you can't help but wonder sometimes. We're kind of like, why are they friends? Because they're so different, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that it's like you said, it's chosen family. It goes beyond having the same, you know, beliefs and having, you know, the same interests, any of those things. It's really just they're all individual people, and even though their differences and their disagreements, if that's a word, that they're still like they're still a unit, you know.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, totally. In walks Rachel. Rachel is so different in this episode than she is near the end of the season. If you're watching the show for the first time, like, you get the treat of watching Rachel just have, I would argue, one of the best character developments throughout an entire show.
Oh,
like,
hands down. Yeah.
Rachel is so, like, okay, so Rachel, we find out in this episode, you know, she is daddy's little girl to a certain extent, right? She even jokes about the fact that she was getting married so that she wouldn't have to be an adult, pretty much. Like, she's very much financially secure through her dad and then soon to be her orthodontist husband, who she left at the altar, which is why she walks into the coffee house. We also learn right away from here that Rachel knows Monica from high school, and Monica also knows Rachel also knows Ross from high school as well. Monica and Ross are siblings, and so they kind of have this backstory that shows up several times throughout the show, actually. But right away we get a snippet into who Rachel is, and Rachel is this kind of spoiled girl who doesn't really have a footing, doesn't really know who she is, and that's kind of the catalyst for the show in a certain sense, right? Because we're introduced to this new character. We understand that there's already an established group. We understand that there's 5 characters who are an established group, and then Rachel walks in, and then suddenly we've got an established group with 6 characters. And I love her in this episode. I think you see a very specific side of her, which then, has a whole arc throughout the whole series, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree. For someone to be so integrated into like their family and their society with like this very, very strict rules of what your life is supposed to look like, and for you to actually take that risk and step out of it, and that financial security that goes with it, I think it says a lot about her, and you do. And I don't think the show lets us down with that playing out in that, like you said, sure. You just see her develop so much as a character, and you know, you definitely see it when you do things like you know, finish the 10th season and then immediately turn on the first season of the first season one.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so then enter into Monica's apartment, soon to be Rachel and Monica's apartment, which we right away get an unrealistic expectation for what it's like to be in your mid-20s in New York City. And this is something that comes up in the show a lot. For sure. So then we find out that Rachel's going to stay with Monica, which again is a huge...
I guess it's been established that Rachel's staying with Monica.
Yeah. And then we get another snippet of Phoebe, and we haven't talked a lot about Phoebe because she doesn't come up, like, she's very much here for a couple of one-liners in this first episode. She doesn't have, we don't really know much about her. We get a little bit of her backstory, which we'll talk about in a second, but I wrote on my notes, I wrote, Phoebe is the literal best, because she starts singing to Rachel the sound of music, raindrops on roses and blah, 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 blah. And it's so funny. Like, she's just so Phoebe, like she's totally weird, hippy dippy, like, but and like you said earlier, they're all their own characters, but they all get along. And I think like that's what I find is so funny, is that Phoebe is just such the odd one out. You're kind of just like, how is she in this group of friends? Like, like she's just so kind of airy but also so sweet and kind and just wants to help and be there. But she's also so established in herself. Like when the boys are like, hey, Phoebe, like, you want to come over and help us assemble furniture? And Phoebe's like, oh, I would, but I don't want to. It's just like, yeah, I'm not going to do something I don't want to do. That's just
and her trying to evade moving and work that has to do with moving is like a continuous thing throughout the entire duration of the of the show.
You're right, I forgot about that. That's so true, yeah. Oh, man.
Yep.
So then Monica goes on her date with Paul the wine guy, which is amazing, because I love how they just call this guy Paul the wine guy. And then we find out that, Paul is...
is there like a more... less, like a better way to say douchebag on this podcast?
I don't know, I've already said the F word twice.
I know, right? Calm down, Emily.
We'll bleep it out later. If we can figure out how that works on video editing software. Yeah, no, totally. So, yes, so Paul the wine guy is not a great guy. He manipulates her pretty much into sleeping with him.
Yeah.
Which is, like, it was definitely consensual in its nature, but it was manipulative, which then grazed the line of what consensual means.
Yeah, which is, again, I think actually a really, it like a platform for or it's foreshadowing essentially what the next 10 seasons are going to look like. Mm-hmm. Because of all things, there are probably two things that are like the biggest issues that come to mind when someone's like, what are your biggest issues with Friends? One is, transphobia that is continuous the whole way through. Mm-hmm. But then also is the blatant normalizing of manipulating, like men manipulating women into sleeping with them. Mm-hmm. And just sort of really playing into blurring that line of what consent actually is. Mm-hmm. And yeah. And we're gonna have a lot of that to talk about moving forward.
Oh my God, so much. Yeah. Now we get to Ross's apartment. There's a lot of foreshadowing in this episode, when Ross is saying, no, even if I could pick up the courage to ask someone out, who am I going to ask? And then the next scene is right away Rachel looking out the window with this like super 90s kind of soft romantic music.
Are they implying something? I don't know.
And like, to be honest, this isn't even a spoiler. Like, even if you've never watched Friends in your life, like you've heard of Ross and Rachel. I don't know if there's very many shows, maybe we can look this up for next podcast, but if there's very many shows in which they show this kind of back and forth relationship over the course of a literal decade. And right away we are shown that, like in the first episode, we're shown that this is going to be a thing, Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so then we also learn here that Ross is 26 years old.
And also, Joey and Chandler can't put together a bookcase without there being a real weird random piece left over.
Which, like, if you have friends and have assembled furniture, especially IKEA furniture with friends, this is a thing.
Yeah, and also I think it's just that moment where they're like, do you know where this goes? Like this random L-shaped bracket that is not small. It's not like an extra little screw. that could be extra. It's like this very looking pivotal thing. And they're both like, I don't know. And then they just like go and like hide it into the plant. I just
Done with the bookcase.
like it's just very Chandler and Joey, you know?
Yeah, for sure. They have a dynamic too. And like I think that they just have a really good friendship throughout this show. And right away, yeah, you see that again too. It's like
you know what we should do is every episode of our podcast, this new little project, the most memorable or quotable line.
Oh, I already know mine. It's in my notes somewhere. I'll have to find it. Okay. Next scene, we've got Paul the wine guy walking out of Monica's bedroom.
When they shot the pilot, the episode was written out like this: how Monica's relationship or the storyline with Paul the wine guy, and she sleeps with him on the first date. And NBC kind of had a bit of a resistance to it. They kind of were worried that the audience would not like Monica as a character because she slept with Paul the wine guy on the first date.
And they were worried that she would be, quote unquote, a slut and therefore would not be as liked.
Yeah, exactly. So they actually did a poll because as you maybe have noticed, it's not just a laugh track on Friends. It's actually a live audience. So it's filmed in front of a live audience. And so what they did with when they recorded the pilot is after recording it, they actually surveyed the audience that was there to ask their opinion on Monica and whether they thought that it sort of, I guess, like tainted their perception of her. And apparently it's quite unanimous that no one had any issue with it at all, and sort of, I guess, schooled NBC on some modern day ideas of
isn't that I think that's what David Crane said in the commentary of the episode. He says, educated NBC on contemporary modern issues.
Well said. Yeah, and so I think that's just very representative of it's almost like a really great way of starting this all off, because Friends was considered extremely racy for the time. And so in certain ways, it was very progressive, like the main character, or one of the 6 main characters, does something quite provocative for the time on
the
first pilot episode. And that's like a bit of a risk, first of all, and also, considering the show is turns out to be quite an influential show that, I'm sure that in a lot of ways, it also played a part in kind of changing the map of how we see dating, really. Can we talk about fashion?
Of course, yes.
Can we please talk about Monica's dress, where it's a spaghetti strap dress with a t-shirt underneath?
Key.
Okay, first of all, I was alive in the 90s, and there's no way that I could ever pull that off. And I know I was young, but I definitely still tried. And I was aware of the fact that it is a very difficult thing to pull off. So the fact that Monica does it, there's other questionable things about that dress, but she layers it real well.
And it's floral, and she's wearing it with stark white running shoes, I want to say.
And this also comes out of the bedroom tying a big bulky sweater around her waist on top of this dress.
It's key. It's,
yeah.
So you guys all have jobs? Which is great. And then we get a snippet into what Chandler does, which is some form of data entry. It's not clear. And okay, this is my favorite line award. I'm giving my favorite line. If I don't input those numbers, it doesn't make much of a difference. which is like, if you could summarize being 26 and having a dead-end job, it would be that. Like,
or just a job that you're like not passionate about, like, or just doing it to pay the bills because he is paying ridiculous rent in New York
City. Like he just does not care about this job. And like everyone has worked that job where you're like, would it really matter if I wasn't here right now? Like, would it make much of a difference?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a great line from Chandler.
So, Monica works as a chef. So we learn this. We also learn everyone else's jobs. Right? Because Chandler says that Chandler doesn't say specifically what he does, but it's something to do with...
But he puts in numbers somewhere.
Then Joey says he's an actor, which, again, super integral to Joey's character. And then it's not in the Netflix version, and this is going to happen sometimes in the show where we're going to tell you secret scenes from the DVDs.
We're not sponsored by the DVDs, but we're going to tell you some secret DVD information that might spur you on to go buy them.
Exactly. And that is, we see a scene where Phoebe is in a subway station playing a very, very terrible guitar song on her guitar, and we presume that this is how Phoebe makes money because we don't really know anything else about Phoebe at this point. And then we get, so no snapping his turtle is a great line. Before there was no snapping his turtle for 2 years. So then
penises are being paralleled to both phones and turtles in this episode.
Very, very great. No snap in his turtle. That is specific. So then Monica delivers a line, which is also very important because of the patriarchy. And she says, I hate men.
Snap, 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 snap.
And then Joey goes, I still can't believe you didn't know it was a line. And Monica pushes him off the couch, which is also excellent.
It is. It's very excellent.
Rachel walks in and she's got this fancy new pair of boots, and she bought them on Daddy's credit card.
Oh, right.
And everyone's like, okay, come on, Rachel. Like, enough's enough. You got to cut up your credit cards.
Yeah. The cutting up the credit card scene. Seeing everyone crowded around, supportively helping Rachel cut up the credit cards.
Yeah.
And like this moment of taking on financial independence and then arguably the best line of the entire episode, maybe the entire season, and a very wise line of welcome to the real world. It's oh no, what is it, Emily?
Welcome to the real world. It sucks. You're gonna love it.
Yeah, there you go. It's such a good line. But yeah, I feel like that scene is just, there's something very memorable about it, and it definitely stuck with me over time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that line also is, again, a catalyst to the whole show, which like we keep saying that, but I think that this pilot episode really does a good job of setting up what the plot line is going to be, and so much of the plot line really is just about these characters all trying to find their footing in their mid to late 20s in New York City, and going through the regular trials and tribulations of life. Finally, we finish off by coming into the last scene of the show, which they're having a conversation. Phoebe's being weird again. And then
Classic.
We see Rachel, and I really like this camera shot where you see the pot of coffee and like kind of the lower midsection of Rachel's body, and she goes, anyone need more coffee? And then the camera pans up and you see her face holding the coffee, and Rachel is now working at Central Perk. So the show kind of comes full circle in a single episode. You wanted to give out the best outfit award.
Best outfit. Well, I didn't necessarily need to give it out, but I definitely think we should debate it.
Interesting. Okay.
I mean, because we've talked about Monica's pants, Monica's
dress.
We have not touched base on Phoebe's cut off jean vest, oversized jean vest.
Yeah, very specific. Mm-hmm.
And then also, we haven't talked about Joey's haircut and outfit.
I have a note that says Joey's hair. Joey's hair is so 90s. Like, if 90s could be summed up in a hair, it would be Joey's hair.
So perfectly, like, swoop around like that. God, you know, like they're like curtains or something.
It's so good.
Because like the original Bieber, the Bieber swoop, you know.
Oh my God, yeah. And it looks so like luscious too. You're like, what conditioner are you using, Joey? Yeah, for sure, for sure. I also really like the outfit when Rachel is calling Barry, I think it is. She's leaving him a voicemail.
Yeah.
Imagine having someone leave you at the altar and then getting a voicemail. That's awkward. But she's wearing this like pink oversized button-up shirt, which she has like tied into like a crop top, and then she's wearing these high-waisted jeans. And like, look, it's 25 years later and I wear that kind of outfit on a regular basis. So I think that like that is a very, again, stand the test of time kind of outfit.
Yeah.
Actually, I shouldn't say stand the test of time, because you couldn't wear that like 10 years ago, but you can wear it again now.
Totally.
Which I'm super into.
Okay, I'm going to throw you a curveball here.
Oh.
I think one of my favorite outfits is Ross's outfit.
Ooh.
Not because it's just a Ross outfit.
Yeah.
You know, like it was just the perfect outfit to put him in, because I think his style doesn't really change with time. It's just like, this is Ross.
Yeah, he's kind of like this geeky, like oversized shirts and jeans. That's like his style throughout the whole show, I think.
Yeah, whereas like everyone else, their fashion definitely develops. And so like starting out, like Ross is going to basically look exactly like that for the entire rest of the next 10 years.
Although his hair changes slightly.
Yeah, well, he uses
worse and
more or less mousse in it. But then outside of that, I can't decide between Monica's pants and Monica's dress.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I would say between Monica's two outfits, I would say Monica's dress. Just if like we're talking about the like purity of the 90s, you know, like got the strappy straps. Okay, that's 90s. She's got the straps over a white t-shirt, also 90s. She's got the white running shoes with a dress, super 90s, and she's got the cardigan or big oversized sweater that she wraps around her waist. Like those four elements are just so important.
It's definitely the most memorable outfit in this episode.
And that's the first episode of Friends, the first jump into the journey.
Oh my God. And it just, you don't even know when it just sets it up so well, you know, for everything that's to come. Don't forget to check us out on Instagram, because we're going to be running a few different polls, like for best fashion and, best most memorable line. That's all going to happen on our Instagram page. So if you want to participate in the results for next week for episode 2, season 1 of Friends, check us out and give us your opinion. See you next week for another episode of What the Phalange.